Right, you should now see a big picture of a big tree. And what we're going to do, we're looking this week at texture blending. And what the thing that really got me about this was an ability to be able to repurpose your images. And quite often, if you like, you can save images that would have been probably destined for the trash, for the bin. Something that might have a nice strong foreground but has a pretty ropey background, very distracting. You've not been able to get the right depth of field. You've got fences. There's loads of different things that you could that could stop you. Then you think, well, no, I'll just keep it on my computer for 5 years and then delete it then. And I find this a really interesting way of, if you like, coming up with something where you can actually create some quite astounding artwork with your images. Right, remember, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. I've got my chat. I'll just open my chat so I can actually see what's going on. Effie Morse. Oh, right, okay, Effie, I'll put you down for that. Thank you. Yeah. Right, so I've got my chat open as well. Right, okay. Sorry about that. We will continue. Right, so today we're going to be looking at the main, if you like, building block of texture blending, and that's textures itself. So we'll be having a look at how to make them, how to make and how to use them. We'll be having a look at smart objects, which again is one of the key parts of texture blending. We'll be looking at colour lookups, which again are really useful in being able to actually get the best and get some different colour takes on your final images. We're going to then look at, in a little bit more detail, at select subject and select mask, or select a mask, which again are key components of doing texture blending. So let's start with a bit of an example. And I'll show you this. I don't know how many of you have got Creative Cloud, but if you have got Creative Cloud, you've got something called your libraries panel. And I think it is absolutely phenomenal because I can store, I mean, it's nice. We'll use quite a few brushes and I can have the brushes in my brushes panel, but then I've got to keep opening it and closing it. And if I want something else, then I've got to go for that in a different panel. I've got lots of different folders in my libraries, and this libraries panel is actually it's on the cloud. You get 20 gigabytes of storage space on the cloud when you sign up for the Photoshop and Lightroom package, the photography package. And it gives you this, and you can store anything in here. So I've got brushes, I've got a texture, I'll get rid of that one. I've got textures in there, I've got brushes, I can make vignettes and store them in there. I've got some textures. There's loads of stuff. You can save colors, you can save anything into the library. And it just makes it dead easy for you to be able to get at things. And not only that, if you've got more than one computer, this is available on every computer that uses the Photoshop. So if I shut this computer down and get hold of my laptop and go to Birmingham, I can access all these on that computer as well. So it's a pretty powerful thing, and I just thought I'd explain that a little bit because you'll see me using it a bit. Well, you'll see me using it a lot because I do. Right. So where are we? Let's try and we'll look at making a texture, because you can make a texture from an actual image, or you can make it from scratch. It's up to you which way you do it, but let's have a go at doing it both ways this time. Right, so that's going to be what we're going to be trying to do. Now, what I normally do as a starting point for making a texture, and honestly, there is no right or wrong answer to this. It's just you go with the flow and you get somewhere. But my first thing is to make I duplicate the layer. So this was my duplicate. And what I did was then I went over this with a smudge brush. Right. So I'm going to click and drag a little bit. And you'll see it does quite a lot, actually. I'll click and drag a bit more. And what it's doing is it's mushing all the tones together from the top half of the image. So the overall tonality is going to be bluish. But it does extend down into the bottom. But if I now do the bottom bit, I'm going to get a little bit of some of the browny, earthy tones coming through with that. But you will see that if you go too mad, it just fills it in like that. And you'll end up with like a blue and then some nice browny tones in the bottom. But all this smudge brush is doing, and you'll see if I click on it, it moves around every time. So it basically means that you're not going to get a lot of repeating patterns. So that is how I got this. So basically I've just got some blue up at the top and I've got some browny tones at the bottom. And this is where it's important to think about your images and your textures. Try and build a texture for a particular image that you might want to do. And okay, I'll try something with the sky, and there's going to be something on the ground here. Right, next, what I'm going to do is use a brush now. So I've now used one brush. I've used my smudge brush, and I'm going to use another brush. And what this is to do is to put basically some brush strokes on. So let's have a look. And I said this will turn out completely different because every time you do it, it comes out different. So here I've turned that layer off now. So here I've got an empty layer, and I'll try my watercolor brush. And you don't tend to need them pretty big, and the bigger your brushes are, the more processors intensive they are. So you've got to be careful again not to take it too far. So I can click and drag and click and drag, and I can start putting some, like if you like, a little bit of grit to my texture. That's not bad. I mean, you can control basically the opacity. Let me get that out of the way. You can control the opacity and drop it down a little bit. And then what you can do is basically say, well, that's all right, but it's a little bit dark now. I've got that. And you can use another brush. I've got another paint brush here, so I can add a few bits in with that. And that does tend to be a little bit blacker. Okay. And you just go for it. Make your brush bigger, make your brush smaller, all that kind of stuff. And that's how I got to this one. But I've obviously gone a bit mad with black on that, so I'll just show you. If I undo them, then all I've done there, instead of having an opacity and a flow of 100%, I've just gone back on the opacity and back on the flow a little bit, and then I'm not creating such quite deep blacks. I mean, you can have this any colour. It's picking up your foreground and your background colours. So I get something that I'm happy with, which was this one that I finished up on. And then I think, ooh, it's gone a bit dark because of all the stuff I've put on it. It's getting a bit dark. So I'll just put an adjustment layer on. And all I've done is I've just gone down to here and put a levels adjustment layer on. And when I do that, all I've done here is it was in the middle, and I've just took the grey slider and took it towards the black slider a bit, and it lightens things up for me. And I get to a point where I'm happy. I'll probably just pull it back a little bit. There we are. So I've now got my levels adjustment layer on, and it's where I want it to be. Okay, next I think, oh, what about a bit of colour? I might want to change the colour a little bit. So I'm going to put a Hue and Saturation adjustment layer on. And again, exactly the same. All the adjustment layers are in here. So I've just clicked on Hue and Saturation. Now, initially, there wasn't I didn't have a mask on it. So I'll just get rid of that mask. And what I've got here is my Hue and Saturation panel. And I've ticked the Colorize button so that it gives me a colour over everything. And then I can just play about with the hue and come up with something that I think, okay, well, let's go for a bit of blue. I can change the saturation. I can change the lightness. I'll leave it about there. And then all I've done is I've put a mask on. So I'll just undo that mask. And I've put a gradient across the mask. So now we've got the colour from the bottom and the top being fetched from different places. So the black is cutting through to the layer underneath it, to this. And the white is putting the colour that I've got selected by the Hue and Saturation, which is this turquoisey colour. Now, if I wanted to change that, I can just go back to here. And let's try and make it a bit browner. Oh, yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, okay. So I've got some brown and some blue now. And you can see I'm winging it. You know, I'm just going for it as we go through this. Next, I think, well, what do I want to do with it? Well, I could, at this point, say, well, I'm quite enamored with this texture. What I'll do is I'll save it. And what I'm going to do is to save it, I'm going to save it as a layer. So I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, which is you need 3 fingers and this for it. So you need 4 fingers for it. It's Control, Alt, Shift, and E. And what that's going to do is give me a stamp visible layer. So I'll just take that to the top. So this layer is a amalgamation of all the layers underneath it for the minute. But now what I can do is I've got my webinar brushes. But if I grab this now and drop it into there, it'll put it in for me. And now that's been uploaded to the cloud. So it's not taking space on my computer, but it's on the cloud. So anytime I need it, I can just drag it back out again. So I'll get rid of that for the time being now. That was all I did that for, a stamp visible, just so, because you don't want layers going in your libraries necessarily, because they're huge. Right, next, I think, well, let me try and move this on a little bit and try something different with it. So what I'll do is I'll add some foreground interest. So let's say I want to make this like it's like a scene. And I've got brushes. So I'll turn that off. I'll have a new layer just there. And in my brushes, I've got things like what I call my wildflower foreground. And I can just make sure I've got a new layer, and I can click on that, and it'll put that down. Now my opacity's down at 59%, so I don't want that. So I'm going to undo that, put these back up to 100 to give myself a bit of flexibility. And then I'm going to click, and that puts that in that position. Now, I'm going to do it again, but I don't want it to be necessarily repeating patterns. So I'm going to put this on a different layer, on a new layer. And I'm going to put that in position somewhere there. So there's a bit of an overlap. And then I'm going to transform it. And what I'll do is I'll flip it horizontal. And then I'll drop it down a bit at one side, just so it looks a bit different. So they're going at a different angle and it's a bit different. Yeah, I've not done enough, so I'll just drag that out a bit that way, like that. Okay. And I've got lots of other brushes. Oh, yeah, there's my seaside flower. I've got a seaside flower. So what you could do is try and get a little bit of depth to your image. So we could put another layer on and put, say, let's make this a bit bigger. And we could put some of this along, which, oh no, that's the same brush. I'm using the same brush. Okay, nobody spotted that, did they? I can have, oh, I've got a dead wildflower here. So I could stick one of them in. And then I could rotate it round a little bit if I wanted. And put another one in over here. So you can see where I'm going. You can build up a set of information that you want as the foreground. Now, I did that with this one. So I'm going to get rid of these three now that I've already made. And then what I did was I duplicated that and I just moved it a bit higher up. And then I put a bit of a mask on because it obviously now had a flat bottom. There was a line going across there. So all I did was I just put a soft brush and just masked it out. And then I had that as a slightly lower opacity. So it gives a little bit of a feeling of depth that you're looking at the distance. And then finally I thought, if this is a scene, it might have some birds in it. All right, well, I've actually got a geese flying brush. So I stamped that on and I just reduced the opacity a little bit. So they look as though it brings a little bit of the blue through. And then I thought, I'm missing something in here. So I just went on I just cut out somebody and I've put him down here. And all I've done is put a little bit of a mask on the bottom. So I've faded him into the undergrowth and just had this ominous looking person walking away in the foreground. And so that is basically just winging it, coming up with something that's different. And then when I've finished that, I can do the Control Alt Shift and E, and then I can drag that one and put that one in there. So I've now got two textures that I've made and they're safe on the cloud, and I can get at them from any computer that I own. Okay, let's have a look at something a little bit more specific now. And this is something that I thought it'd be really good if you responded to this and if you wanted to. You don't have to, but it's like an homework. On my website, I've given you the two images, the image of the lion and the image of the texture. And then I've given you some instructions. So what I need to do is just to say, if you wanted to have a go at it, post it on Facebook and tag me in at Live Link Training. Right, so what we're going to try and do here, and you can see there isn't many steps to this, is we're going to try and turn this one, which I think has a fairly strong subject, but I'm going to try and turn it into something like that I'm now looking at a texture for a background. So the texture I've decided on was this one. And I just want to now go through the steps for you for making this selection, because once I've got that, if I open that up, you'll see that this appears, and all I've done on the top is I've just finished it off. But the most important thing, if you like, is the selection. So let's turn that off and we'll duplicate that layer. I'll switch it back on and then I'll get rid of that mask. And then I'll switch that off and I'll click back on my background layer. Right, so now I need to make a selection of this. And the way I'm going to do that is there's two steps to this that work quite well together. You can make a selection any way you like. You don't have to do it my way. This way, I think, is probably one of the simplest ways. Now, earlier I mentioned smart objects. And what I want to show you is that this little thing at the bottom here, this is a smart object. And what I've done is I've actually created a smart object out of this image. So I'll just rasterize that one. So now this is a pixel layer. If I want to use filters on it, and one filter in particular I'll want to use a lot, if I use it on the pixel layer, I'm physically changing the pixel numbers. And it's really difficult for me to like back it off any, or to go back 3 steps. I know I've got history, but you haven't got a lot of steps in that. So what I do is, if I change this, if I right click and convert this to a smart object, what I've done is I've enclosed this image now in a bomb-proof container. Oh, excuse me. I'll cut that out. So that whatever I do to it, I can't do to the actual image, and it tags things on the outside. And one thing I want to do a lot is go to the filter menu and put on the camera raw filter. And what it'll do is it'll add this onto the outside of the image. So here I might want to say, well, I'll add a bit of texture, I'll put a bit of clarity in, maybe a bit of vibrance, take the highlights down a little bit, try and take a bit of heat out of this bright area here, and take the whites down a bit maybe. Okay, so I've now done that, and if I click OK, that will then render out on the image, but it's rendering out on top of the image now because I've now got it as a smart filter. And the good thing about this is that I can go back in at any time by just double clicking on it, and I can change things because all the sliders are exactly where they were when I finished. So I'll just lighten it up a little bit and then click, and it'll re-render that out, but I'm not touching the original image. So now I want to make a selection. Now the 2 parts that I use to make a selection is the quick selection tool and select a mask. Now there's 2 buttons that you need to access, but you can't see them unless you have a selection tool active. So if I click on my quick selection tool, so you've got to have a tone selection tool active, and then these 2 buttons appear. And select subject, what that does is it uses what Adobe calls Sensei technology to try and select the main thing that is the main. Do you get that? The main thing. Sorry, couldn't resist that. It's going to try and select it, but it'll try and select the prominent subject. So I'm going to go to select subject, and what that will do is create me not a bad selection. It's never going to be perfect, and I mean it's pretty ratty up here, but we know that anyway. But all I've got to do now is just make it a little bit better at the bottom. Now, if I'm trying to composite something that stood on the ground, what I will do is try and include a little bit of the ground as well. So I'm just going to get rid of these bits in here. So I'll add a little bit of ground around here. And maybe a little bit at that side. And then I need to get rid of the stuff that's in there, so because that's seen through the hole. So we'll do that, and then we'll just get rid of them bits there, and maybe that bit there. Oh, need to get rid of that bit as well. There we go. So we've got something like that where we've got a little bit of it, because I'm going to soften all these edges anyway. And now what we've got a pretty good selection anywhere where there's a bit of contrast. So around its legs, around here, pretty good, but it gets ratty where the hair is. So the next step is that select a mask comes thundering to the rescue. So I'm going to click select a mask. And here you can see we've got a selection, but it's not a very good one. In view mode here, where you can view your selection different ways. There is onion skin, there's marching ants, overlay, you can do a rubylith overlay, so you can look at it different ways to see if it looks any good. And then there's on layers, so if you've got a layer underneath it, you can actually see the layer underneath it. My preference is the onion skin, because this gives us a transparency slider. And what I can do is I can back that off and it takes me right back to the original image, so I can have a look at any bits that I'm missing and whether I think they're important. Well, there's a couple of little stray hairs here, but no, if I can get this lot looking good, I think I'll be happy. But it's a really useful slider to be able to do that. Now, how does select and mask work? Well, it works on what they call a radius. And the radius is the distance over which Photoshop is searching for a contrast edge. So down here, where the lion is, where the lion's leg is, it only needs a very small radius for it to find the edge of the contrast. Now, if I go up and show you the edge here, at the moment you can't see anything. But if I put a 2-pixel radius on, you'll start to see where Photoshop is looking now for these contrast edges. Now down here, it's going to nail it. It's going to be brilliant. But once you get up here, it's going to chop all that lovely fluffy hair off because it's more than 2 pixels away. So we've now got a tool in Photoshop over here in the toolbox called the Refine Edge Brush tool, or as I call it, the Wispy Hair tool. So what I'm going to do, I'll just turn that off. And I'm going to get my brush, and again, it's exactly the same, square brackets to make your brush bigger and smaller. We start off in Add to Selection mode. I'm going to have a little bit of a, probably a tiny bit of softness on it, but not much. You don't need much. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scuff. I'm not going into the hair because that will degrade it. I'm just trying to go in these areas. So if I'll just go just one scuffed. And what that's doing now is that trying to remove anything that it thinks is background. And so I'll go down here a little bit. I'm going down here. And you've got to try and do this in as few moves as you can, because the more you go back, the more you're degrading the edge. So if you can get it in one scuffed, you're doing all right. You may get some little patches like this. They will probably blend into the background, but if they don't, you can hold the Alt key down. And you can see I've got a minus in my brush now. And I can just click that, but that's not really done what I wanted it to do. So I'm going to click on that again. And then I'm going to go around the top. Come down this side, just in little scuffs. And you'll see that it's actually making a decent job of separating the fur. Now, the problem you've always had with this kind of thing is separation, is that Photoshop can only select something that it can see. And it can see clearly, that's sharp and in focus. Now, if you've got any depth of field, some of these hairs at the front, they will be sharp in focus. But the ones towards the back, they'll be slightly out of focus. And what Photoshop will do is go, I'm not really sure whether this is a hair or not, or fur. So you may have a little bit of work to do later on. But normally you can blend that into the background. And then all I want is to just make the edges of this a bit softer. So I'm just going to give that a quick scuffed. But again, the bigger your brush, the longer it takes. So I'm just going to take my time on that bit. But I just want something that roots the animal down, or the person. And then we'll have a slightly smaller brush and we'll just soften that edge off a bit in there. And maybe a little bit under there, although I've been scared to go under there. Right, okay, that's not so bad. Right, now we've got the global refinements. We can smooth. With hair, you rarely need smoothing. It's just if you've got a pretty angular selection that you might want to smooth it. Feather, might want a tiny bit of feather, but very little. Probably 0.2, 0.3 of a pixel. Do I want contrast? Not really. What that's going to do is make the hair all spiky. And then shift edge. Well, what this does is it contracts or expands the selection. So here we've got shift edge. If I shift it in, it takes the edge in all the way around. And you see it cuts off a load of the hair. if I take it right out, it makes the selection bigger so I can see more of the background. And I don't want any of them, so I'm going to set that back to 0. And then I've got my output settings. Well, decontaminate colours is useful because what it will do, depending on the circumstance, if you have got any of these edge pixels coming around these hairs, what Photoshop will do with decontaminate colours, it'll look at the colour surrounding the hair, and if the edge pixels vary by a lot, it'll replace them by the colour of the hair. So if I click on decontaminate colours, well, you can see a little bit, it just makes it a little bit browner. Yeah, that's not bad. All right, well, I'll go with that and see how it goes. And if it's too much, you've got an amount slider. You can drag that down. Now it's asking to output to a new layer and a layer mask. That's the way I would normally do it. But for this exercise, because this is how it's set out in the tutorial on the website, I'm not going to use decontaminate colours because then it'll let me output it as a selection. It won't. If you use decontaminate colours, selection disappears. It grays it out. So I want to output it as a selection. So I'm going to click OK. And now I've got my selection of the lion and a little bit of foreground. But I don't want the selection on here. I want it on the layer above, which is my texture layer. So I'm going to bring that on. And you can see that this texture layer I've thought about because the sun is coming this way. So it's lighter at this side than it is at this side. So again, you create your textures for some of the images that you might want to be making. And now this is the place where John was mentioning earlier that here I've got black as my foreground colour and white as my background colour. But there's a couple of things you can do. And first is you can just go down and put a mask on. And I want the mask to be on this layer. So if I put the mask on, what will happen is it'll do it the wrong way around. I'll end up with a white mask, which is not the mask I need. So I'll just undo that. But now if I hold the Alt key down and click the mask button, it'll put an opposite mask on. And so now I've got a black mask, which is the correct way around because the black is cutting through to the layer underneath. The white is showing me anything that's on this layer. So I've now got my lion and I'm reasonably happy with that. And now we need to use the mask. So I've got to make sure that I click on the mask. And what I'm going to do now is try and bring some of this texture into the edge of the lion. Not completely, but a little bit. And what I want is my brush tool. And all I'm going to use is a soft round brush. But what I need to do is make it quite a big soft brown brush, like really big. Because if you make it small, you'll end up putting poofs in like this. And that's not good. I don't want that. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to make my brush nice and big. You can see where the centre of my brush is by that little cross. And there's a lot of clicking goes off now. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start clicking and I'm going to move towards the lion. And you'll see that it starts to drop that colour, to mask the colour in. Now if I'm going round there and I'm just trying to bring some of that in, to bring it in to the edge of the lion. And down at the bottom as well. I can use that to try and just so I've got a little bit that it's standing on. And I'll probably need a little bit more in there. And if it's too much, you can just do edit and undo and then try it again. And I think that's a bit better. And I think I need some around this side. So you gently just bring in a little bit of texture. And for this, I've got to get a bit further away because I just want a little bit of texture around the legs. And then I'd have a smaller brush and just try and do a little bit in here. So I'll see if I can just, yeah, just do that. So we're just trying to make this texture unify with the subject. then that's not that bad. I'll just, I think, do a little bit more over this side. There we go. Okay. Well, that's where I got to when I did this one earlier. And they're not far off the same. In fact, I might like that one a bit better. But anyway, we'll get rid of that one now. So now we've used select and mask, and we've created a nice selection, and we've used the mask then to bring in some of that background texture. Now to finish things off, I'm going to do again, it's called the stamp visible, that four-finger one. I'm going to do Control, Alt, Shift and E. And what that's going to do is put me up a stamp visible layer. Now I'll turn that off and I'll have a go at that again because it didn't work. Control, Alt, Shift and E. There we go. So I've now got a stamp visible layer. So I've now got this layer that's, it's basically smooshed all these together into one layer here. And now I want to add some effects to it, and I want to add a filter to it. So again, this is Smart Object. So I'm going to convert this to a Smart Object. And then I'm going to go across and I'm going to go to my filters and I'm going to add my Camera Raw filter. Now this is wonderful because there's a load you can do in here. So I'll put a little bit more clarity on maybe and a little bit of texture. No, I don't think I want to do much else. If I wanted to, you could sharpen it. I'm going in the FX panel. I'll do like my vignettes. So I'm going to pull a vignette on there to like morph it around the outside. And then I'm going back to the basic panel. And what I'm going to do is add a profile. And these are amazing. If you haven't been into these, then you need to. And what they are the way that Camera Raw is built, because a Camera Raw file isn't an image, it's just data. And what you need is a profile to convert it into an image. But these profiles can be used anytime, anywhere. And there's some color ones, there's some monochrome ones. Here we've got some basic one, which is your color and mono. We've got some artistic ones. And these ship with Photoshop, so we can go through them and think. And what this will try and do is it like, I don't know, is it homogenize? It tries to bring all the colors together. So I'll not like that. Let's have a look at modern. And there's quite a few modern ones, and this one I particularly like. Probably not for today, but I really like the look it gives. Modern 3, because I mean this is called Sunset Lion, so I want some sun on it. So I'm going to click that one and then click OK. Next, I think I'll finish it off with a border. So for my border, what I've got to do is go down to the FX panel. Sorry, the FX button down at the bottom. And I want a stroke. So I'm going to click stroke, and that'll take me to the stroke panel. And you can see that it's put me on, by default, it's put me on like a 9-pixel stroke. Now, important thing to realize is that you've got different places to put the stroke. You can put it outside your image, in which case it goes behind the pasteboard so you can't see it. You can put it inside your image, which gives you a nice square edge. Or you can put it in the center, so that's half and half. So you can see it went a little bit thinner. I think I'll leave it to the center. Now the color, you could have this black, you could have this white, or while you've got the color picker open, you could move into the image and pick a color from the image. So here we'll say, do we like that one? Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, I'll go with that. And in Photoshop now, you can have multiple strokes. So I'll add another stroke. This time, I'll make it a bit wider. I'll put it inside again. Color, let's say, should we make it a bit lighter? Or should we make it a bit darker? I don't know. And you can mix and match these. So if I leave that there, just a minute, and click OK, then if I go back in here, I've got 2 strokes. So if I just double click on one of them, it'll take me back to here. I've got this darker stroke. So just so you can see it, I'm just going to make it a bit thicker. There you go. So you've got 2 strokes now going around here. And then you can get inventive by putting a beveling emboss on it to make it look as though it's nice and curved at the edge, and a contour. You can do all that good stuff. And then I click OK. And I think that, well, we've just gone 10 to 4, so we've got a few minutes left if there's any questions.